Army has the reputation of the big army. Hey, you're a cog in the machine. You give them your. I mean, how did that process work?
Well, you get to Vietnam, you do a 3-day in-country orientation where they teach you all about snakes and bamboo vipers and all that crazy stuff, and what not to do, and punji stakes and all that. And then I'm sure that while you're there, they're working on who needs a track vehicle mechanic or who needs infantryman, whichever the case may be. And they just put me on a plane and flew me up to Da Nang, or actually flew me to Chu Lai on that one, and then helicoptered me to LZ Baldy out in the middle of nowhere. And that's how I got to the unit I served with.
Now, as you're getting further and further away from civilization, did the hair on the back of your neck start to stand up straighter?
Well, I'm probably a little bit on the crazy side, and I think the curiosity factor I was okay with. You know, I mean, I'm like you're talking about. I've never felt like, I'm not going to say I've never felt fear, but I've always just been excited about what's going to happen next. I never worried when I was in country about dying. That thought never crossed my mind. I just felt like if I did what I knew to do and used the experiences that I had and everything else and applied them the way you're supposed to, I was going to be okay.
So you're rolling into LZ Baldy. Whereabouts in Vietnam was that?
That's in the I Corps area, closer up to the DMZ. It was about 17 kilometers southwest of Da Nang.
And so it's a pretty remote location then?
Called the Quay San Valley is our area of operation. I mean, a lot of Viet Cong, a lot of NVA in that area, especially in 68 and 69.
And how big was that? Was the forward operating base that you were staying at? How big was it?
Not very big. I mean, battalion headquarters.
So it was a battalion headquarters, right? And then so you check in there. You land on your airplane. You land on the helicopter. Get out of the helicopter, and then what happens?
Well, I go to F Troops company headquarters, report to the first sergeant, tell him who I am and what I am, and the first sergeant called everybody son. So he said, son. I told him I was a track vehicle mechanic, and if he'd point me in the direction of the motor pool, I'd go report to the motor sergeant. He said, son, we really don't have a motor pool here in Vietnam. He said, there is a guy that runs the maintenance department. He's Spec 5 so-and-so. And he said, you'll see him at Chow tonight, but you'll be a machine gunner on a 113A1, and we'll make sure you get a toolbox. So if anything goes wrong while you're out there, that's your job to fix them.
So there's the wake-up call. I fought in the Battle of Ramadi in 2006, and you know what vehicle we used for casualty evacuation? 113s. Yep, the exact same vehicle. So that's what you got assigned. You got assigned to a 113, which is an armored personnel carrier made out of aluminum, if I'm correct.
I'm not sure. Probably. Wouldn't be a bit surprised, though.
And they're basically a box with tracks. That's basically what they look like.
Exactly.
There's a box with tracks on them. They're not huge. They're not as big as a tank. How many people do you think they hold? Maybe
you could probably put 8 or 10 on the inside.
Yeah. Our joke about armored personnel carriers was how many people can you fit into them? One more. So that's what you get assigned. So now you realize, okay, there's no motor pool here. That's not happening. He says you're going to be a machine gunner on one of these 113s. So you check in. Who are you checking in with now? Are you?
Well, when my unit, my platoon was out in the field and they came back in for chow that night, that's when I was introduced to the LT and the platoon sergeant, and then I don't know, they just picked a track that was short one guy, and that's the one I went to.
And how many tracks did you have in your platoon?
9.
Wow, that's a pretty big platoon.
Well, it's 18 M60 machine guns, 950 caliber, and one 106 recoilless rifle, so it's a lot of firepower.
Yeah, that's serious business. I didn't think they had that many in one platoon. And so then, okay, so now you settle in, and what kind of missions were you guys doing?
Well, when I originally got in country, they called them search and destroy, and then I think somebody in Washington decided we need to change it to search and clear. it didn't sound quite as disastrous if you called it search and clear. But the mission was exactly the same thing. You still went out, checked all the villages, checked all the people, anybody that was out working in the fields, looking for caches of rice, looking for weapons that were hidden in different villages and that type of thing. Sometimes you'd have intelligence reports that would send you somewhere where maybe they had some information that there was something bad going on. Sometimes it was there, sometimes it wasn't. The area of operation that I actually worked in was exactly the same one. My Lai was in my area of operation. We called it the Pinkville on our map. And I think Lieutenant Calley's thing had happened 3 weeks or 4 weeks after I got in country or something, like in third week in March or maybe around the 1st of April. You're familiar with that story. Yeah. And then...
but you guys, did you guys hear anything about it?
I think we heard a little bit about it, but communication back then was not the same as it is today. I mean, obviously nobody had cell phones or anything like that. You didn't have pictures or any information. We just knew there was a lot of people in that village, and it was a sizable village for as remote as it was. Most of them were just all rice farmers that were out there, so all they do is harvest rice and carry it to market. But we'd been through there a number of different times before and after the actual My Lai massacre. And I think the thing that was interesting about Vietnam was for villagers, if I used an interpreter to ask somebody a question in a village about would they rather have the NVA in charge or would they rather have the Americans or the South Vietnamese military in charge? And they were really always reluctant to answer that question because I don't think there was a good answer they could give me. If they answered it one way, it kind of meant they were Vietnamese NVA sympathizers, and if they answered it the other way, then that meant they were totally opposed and they would support us. But we know that wasn't the way it happened either. They were just trying to grow rice and stay alive. Mm-hmm. So, if we would leave them alone and the NVA would leave them alone, they'd be the happiest people on the face of the earth. But it didn't happen that way. We didn't abuse them, but the NVA abused them all the time, not only for their rice, but, for shelter and everything else.
What was your op tempo like? And so how long would you go out on a mission for?
Probably a standard time was about 20 to 22 days at a time, and then we get resupplied in the field with Chinooks for fuel and for water and food and everything.
So this forward operating base that you were out, that you were out of when that platoon came back, they'd been out for a long time. They'd been out for...
And on that particular one, I don't know, but I would have to guess they probably were at least a 2-week period of time. Once you went out and you started through the area of operation, you usually didn't come back until you covered the whole thing.
But you guys are living... Do you have dismounts with you, or is everyone in the platoon traveling inside the track and sleeping inside the track, and you got water? What's like the daily routine like?
Well, you get up and fix breakfast, fix some coffee or some C rations. And, easy to carry it because you're armored personnel carriers. Weight didn't make a whole lot of difference to us. We'd have somebody would fix this, somebody would fix the coffee. We'd all kind of share the meal together because you didn't have any food that came out to the field very often. And we'd just sit down maybe the night before, that morning with the LT, and go over what the daily operation was and follow up with a Mylar cover on the map sheet and a grease pencil and, go through the checkpoints throughout the course of the day. And, if you faced any difficulties, you just faced it head on, returned fire, called in artillery. Maybe you'd get a call, an infantry unit to be pinned down. Nice part about being armored personnel carriers, you could move real fast, lay down a lot of suppressing fire and let them back out and save them. We did that for Marines as well as United States Army. So.
Then, and then this is just what you do. This is just the day in, day out.
All day, every day.
And you're during the nighttime. You stay on watch, but you're in a perimeter somehow and
circle up just like wagon trains in an old Western television program.
Yeah,
like John Wayne and the guys, and then everybody would stay up on the track. There'd be 2-hour segments from 10 to midnight on down to 6 o'clock in the morning. You'd rotate every 2 hours. and you'd just be, you'd have claymores out and set up your perimeter defense and everything. You'd call in detcons so that you had positions available for local artillery, could drop stuff real quick if you needed to have it.
Now, it seems like it would not be a great move for the Viet Cong or for the NVA to attack, you guys. I mean, how often did they attack?
Never. Well, I was there. But I think the big thing is that one of the things you have going for you is you have the speed of movement that you could travel with an armored personnel carrier. So there really wasn't any way that they could pattern you and go set up in front of you or follow you fast enough to be, even if they probably walked through the night to get you, which might have been possible, but it never happened. I just don't think they ever tried to do that. When they had enough infantry units and Marines that were in the area and they were walking slower and their movement was slower, that's who they would set up on.
And then you guys would utilize your firepower to go help out. If some infantry unit called for help, you guys would roll in and lay down the thunder, which you guys most certainly had. That weapons package is no joke right there. Wow.
Well, when you talked about it before, when we rode, 2 machine gunners, the hatch was always open on an APC, and 2 machine gunners sat on the back on that hatch with the guns out to the right and left. Of course, the turret was in the center with a 50 caliber, and you never got down inside. I mean, only if you were taking fire, you'd get down and get behind the M60, but you stayed up on top all the time. Because I guess if you were ever going to hit a landmine, which is, something that happened quite often, you didn't want to be down inside with stuff exploding from that explosion. You wanted to be on the top and maybe get blown clear of it.
So was that the biggest threat to the tracks, was get hit in some kind of a landmine?
Or an RPG rocket from a wood line.
Yeah. I mean, obviously in Iraq and Afghanistan, really. I mean, I can really only talk about Iraq from my experience, but yeah, obviously the roadside bombs were what they did. That was what they did, and they did it well. And the bigger vehicles that we got, the bigger bombs they built. And so when it started my first deployment, we were in Humvees we literally didn't have doors on our Humvees. We actually turned the seats to face outboard so that we could present our weapon and that we could present our front plate of our body armor. And then eventually we welded doors together and put steel doors on. And then by the time I got back to Iraq, we had armored Humvees. And then after that came the big, giant mine-resistant vehicles. And the whole time, the enemy just kept building bigger and bigger and bigger bombs. But we were oftentimes channelized on roads because of bridges or because of just being in the city. Whereas you guys with tracks in the jungle, or you guys could just go wherever you wanted to. Is that right?
Pretty much so. The biggest thing that we had to do, and I mean that was the number one thing in part of the training, whether you drove or you were commanding a track, was you never take the same stream crossing twice. You track the vehicle right directly in front of you. You never get outside of the lead tracks in the ground. And we'd stay in the paddies or around the paddies as much as possible because they weren't very likely to put a landmine in the rice paddies. It would be on the road or the edge of the road, or maybe on a rice paddy dike, but we never went in that direction very often either.
And what was your leadership like? Your young lieutenant, platoon commander. What was he like? What was your platoon sergeant like? What was your interaction with those guys like? And even your vehicle. So who was in charge of your track? Was a
young E5, probably 21 or 22 years old at that time. And the leadership in my platoon, the platoon leader was a great first lieutenant. And I mean, it was one of those things that I learned very early on. The best thing that I could do for the first 3 or 4 months was just shut up and listen and watch what was going on and follow the lead of the people that really knew what was going on. The platoon sergeant was that same kind of a person. The difference with the platoon sergeant was that he was probably in his 30s. He was married. He had children back home. So I don't think it was as easy for him to be a strong leader and a strong decision maker, because I think that was on his mind a lot. The LT was not that way, and everybody that we served with